We move now to Deputy Peadar Tobin on behalf of AN2 and the regional group.
On October 22nd, 2019, the Taoiseach apologised for the humiliation, the disrespect and the deceit shown by the Irish state to the more than 1,000 women in the cervical cancer scandal. On May 2018, he stood up in this chamber and he made a promise to the women affected by the Cervical Check controversy that they would not have to go to court in order to get justice. Now, Patricia Carrick from Galway sadly passed away last year, only a month after she won her case in the courts. Patricia was one of many women who had to battle in the courts for justice, often suffering from great ill health, right up to losing their lives. The Taoiseach, Micheál Martin, stood up in the House and apologised to her on behalf of the state. Now, statistics released to me this week by the state's claims agencies show that since these apologies and promises that no woman will be forced to go through court, a total of 310 women or families have been forced to go through court or through legal routes to achieve justice. Tragically, 38 of these claims relate to women who have already died. 77 cases alone have been lodged this year. Meanwhile, the Cervical Check Tribunal, which was established by the Minister Stephen Donnelly, has so far received 8 claims. We all know what happened with the tribunal. The Minister ploughed ahead with it, ignoring the advice of the 221 Plus group. He disregarded the concerns and he didn't listen appropriately to the women affected. Your government actually extended, by way of legislation before the recess, the time period by which women could make claims to this tribunal in an obvious attempt to see could you attract more claims. Now, we're all too familiar with how cruel the court experience is for these women, with the state fighting them for months and years, and in some cases only settling when it becomes apparent that the women in question only have days to live. We're all too familiar with the names of the women. We're too familiar with the frequent news reports featuring the image of often a young woman, a young mother with young children standing frailly but courageously outside a court. These women should not have to spend the last months of their lives on earth in a courtroom. They should be allowed to enjoy these months with their children and their family. They should have the mental comfort and assurance that their children and families will be looked after when they are gone. In terms of the tribunal, it's clear that women are voting with their feet. 77 women this year have opted to go through the courts or the legal routes, but only 8 have opted to go through the tribunal. Minister, at this stage, will you not concede that the tribunal has failed abysmally?
Minister.
Thank you very much for raising this issue, and I know it's a very personal and a very sensitive issue, and I personally know of a number of women who have been impacted and their families, and I know the devastating impact that it has had on them and on their lives. And the government is here to support the women and to support the families, and that is why the government, with the full support of this House, decided to put in place a tribunal to support women to get justice without having to go through what can be an extraordinarily difficult process in an adversarial environment in a court of law. And the government has, as you know, set up that tribunal now, which was on the recommendation of Mr Justice Meenan, and that has been enshrined in legislation at this point in time. And I do acknowledge the numbers that you have put on the record there, which are undoubtedly very low. I think it is almost certainly the case that some women and their families are waiting to see how the process works out. If there are any changes that are required, then of course the Minister is open to any changes to improving the system that is there. We do not want women to have to go to court to get justice in relation to any matters relating to cervical check. I think we can all agree in this House as to the paramount importance of protecting this service, which is now, of course, back up and running. Over 6,000 women are detected and referred for early treatment each year. So cervical screening continues to have very significant value for population health. And then, of course, we've had the introduction last year of the HPV screening test, which is also a very significant milestone for our cervical cancer screening programme. The recent extension that you referred to of the statutory deadline for making a claim to the tribunal will ensure that any woman or family who is eligible for the tribunal will have sufficient time to consider if they will make a claim to the tribunal or not. And I just want to say that I know the extent of the contact and the consultation that Minister Donnelly had on a personal level in relation to the 221 Plus group and the issues that they wanted to have addressed as part of this tribunal. And the government has done all that it can at this point to support that process. We want a resolution that is non-adversarial in nature, that happens quickly, because we acknowledge the real-time issues that are involved here, and the government will keep this under review. We want to see more of these cases settled in the tribunal than we do in the court, but we also have to acknowledge that it is the constitutional right of every woman to take a case to the court and to have that adjudicated in our judicial system if that is what they so choose. So that option remains, but we want as many cases as possible to be dealt with and settled through the tribunal.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Tobin.
Minister, the Minister for Health promised the 221 Plus group that he would pause the process of the tribunal until there was agreement reached on how the tribunal would work. That didn't happen. In actual fact, the 221 Plus group found out in the media that it was going ahead. I raised the issue of Patricia Carrick in the Dáil last year, and after I raised it, the clinical director of Cervical Check wrote a letter to me critical of my speech. She said that women had not been wronged. She said the slides had not been misread. And I found this extremely odd because Patricia Carrick had won her case and she had received a state apology. It was clear that these women had been wronged. I then sought a meeting with Cervical Check, which I made this point to the clinical director, and I quote, she said, the courts were wrong. So there is complete confusion right now with regards to the government's approach to these women. The courts and the government are at odds with Cervical Check and the HSC. And we have a tribunal which is being avoided wholesale by these women. And your words today, the apologies by the Taoiseach and the promises by the Taoiseach are in complete opposite directions to what is happening on the ground with women. So the question I have for you, will you commit today to reform the tribunal, make it fit for purpose, and finally fulfil your government's promise to these women?
Minister.
Thank you, Deputy. And I just want to make the point that the purpose of the tribunal here is to get cases settled quickly, in months rather than years, and also to respect the deeply sensitive, private and confidential nature of the issues at hand. The hearings, of course, are held in private. There are pre-hearing steps also designed to reduce the adversarial nature of claims, including allowing women to give written statements rather than verbal testimony. So this is a much more informal process than going through the court system. We acknowledge the numbers that you referenced there. The Tribunal Rules of Procedure enable it to make directions also to progress urgent matters, and the Tribunal Register has confirmed that urgent claims will be facilitated. It remains the right of any woman and any family to go to court. The government wants to make this tribunal absolutely user-friendly and to be the vehicle of choice for the settlement of these issues. But we recognise the right of women to go to court if that is their choice. But Minister Donnelly is continuing to keep the issue under review, and if improvements can be made, he certainly will bring forward those proposals.
Thank you, Minister McGrath.